Welcome, friend. I'm Jack, host of the channel, and today we're diving into another episode. Pour yourself a drink and get comfortable, because I've got a powerful story coming your way. If something hits deep, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get into it.
As I drove up to our garage, I found myself worrying. I was later than usual, knowing Dave would be concerned. I kept building my excuse, practicing it before I walked in. I hadn't fallen into the affair willingly, but now, after 8 months, I craved the sexual heights my lover took me to. I still loved my husband, but for some reason, Brian did things to my mind and body that I couldn't resist. I've tried to break it off with Brian many times. He's just so damn seductive and knows all the buttons to push to get me to fail my own will every time. If Dave knew, he'd be more than a little angry. I thought that if push came to shove, I'd be able to talk him out of a divorce, get him to forgive me. I had a plan to work on him, just in case. That's how far I've fallen in my 8-month love affair. I'd found a new me and made plans to prevent Dave, my loving husband, from kicking me out of his life and home if or when he found out. I was certain he'd never figure it out, though. I made sure we had sex whenever he showed any interest. Sometimes I even started things when I didn't feel like it because I loved him so much. I do love him, really. Once in a while, every few days, I'd get that guilty feeling and want to stop what I'd done, to go back in time and never have allowed my attraction for Brian to end up in a sexual fling. It isn't that I love Brian because I don't. Matter of fact, at times I don't like him at all. He gets in a mood sometimes while we're having sex and begins to treat me like a 304. Those are the times that really give me the big climax, even though I hate what he does to me in the process. I just can't resist him or his ways. I looked into the rearview mirror and checked my lipstick and hair. I took a shower at Brian's place and made myself presentable, but I'm paranoid about Dave looking at me and perhaps seeing something out of place that I can't easily explain. I have the same soaps and shampoo at Brian's that I use at home. I even have changes of clothes and underwear at Brian's, just in case. I've been very careful to plan each time with Brian, ever since that one time 7 months ago when I came home, and Dave asked me about my perfume. I realized that I wasn't wearing any since I'd showered at Brian's. I also suddenly remembered I'd put on some of Dave's favorite perfume before leaving for work that morning. I managed to dodge the bullet that time, making up a story about spilling cleaning chemicals on me while digging through the closet for some Kleenex our employee kept stored there. Dave had bought it, hook, line, and sinker. One last look, and I got out. Walking into the house, I stopped at the front door and looked around for Dave's truck. It wasn't where he normally parked it. He'd left it on the street, almost in front of the neighbor's house. That was odd. He usually parked it in our driveway. Meanwhile, inside the house, from Dave's point of view, I watched Karen as she checked her face in the rearview mirror. It had been a long, tiring day for me, and I was tired of waiting for her arrival. Of course, she was late again. It had been getting more and more normal than an exception. Had she been where she claimed she was, I'd have no problem with it. But that wasn't the case. It had all started months ago, and up until it became totally unavoidable, I tried to find a way to get her back with me. I tried everything I could think of, with no help from her. I had made a decision that I wouldn't let her know I knew about her affair. I knew that she had to break it off on her own for it to do either of us any good. Dinners, movies, flowers, candy. I tried all the usual things. I got creative. I made her a special knick-knack shelf, glass and case. I picked her up from her work on a Friday, and we'd gone into the city for a weekend of loving and just going wherever she desired. I tried talking to her about us, but even that had fallen on deaf ears. The weekend in the city had started with her being angry at me, but by the end, I thought I'd made some headway. That didn't last through the next week, though. I finally began to attack her, arguing about her hours and her job. All that succeeded in doing was getting her mad at me. Our sex life dropped off substantially, and then dropped off more, and then more yet. What had been several times a week, and at least 3 times on the weekend, had become, well, it had been a week and a half since we'd last been intimate in any way. 2 weeks since we'd actually had sex. She hadn't noticed, as far as I could tell. I'd known all along what was going on. 7 months ago, I'd actually caught her at it, but she'd managed to fend off my questions and fire back an excuse about why she'd taken a shower at work. What she didn't know was that I'd followed her that afternoon, and I knew precisely why she'd taken the shower, and her job had absolutely nothing to do with it. Finding out had crushed my heart, but I still loved her enough to try to win her back. She was the woman I wanted to have children with. She had my heart, and I'd fallen very hard for her when we'd met. Now, well, it wasn't going to be all that hard to do what I had to do tonight. I wondered briefly how she'd handle it when I left, but thought she'd probably run to her lover, and they'd laugh at me, the imbecile they'd been playing for months. How can a husband compete with a lover who has no need to perform routine honeydews for a wife? How can a husband not confront a wife about her cheating with her lover and try to win her back? Honestly, I tried my damnedest and failed. Tonight, I was going to tell her I had to go out of town on an emergency road trip. It wouldn't be the first time something like this had come up, but it would be the last. You may ask why I didn't confront her. All that would prove is that I caught her, and she'd be sorry for that I caught her, not that she decided ahead of time to quit. My thoughts were, if I won her back without her knowing I knew, I'd know in my heart that she truly loved me. Obviously now, at least to me, that hadn't worked. What she didn't know was that all my worldly belongings were packed in my truck. I'd split the bank accounts in half, quit my job, and taken an offer from an old friend who lived clear across the country. I'd made plans to cancel my cell phone plan, picked up another phone, and paid off my old plan, a penalty I was willing to pay to keep her from calling me later on. I had 1 week left on the old phone, and it was a relief knowing my 401k would transfer to my new employer's savings plan. My cash balance retirement plan would be safe where it was. I was a little upset about quitting my job, as I liked the people I worked with, and my job was about as perfect for me as a job could be. It sucked having to walk away from my coworkers, employer, and customers like this, but it was something I'd thought long and hard about. I'd given it my best shot, and Karen had ignored my efforts totally, too caught up in her affair to realize she'd lost me. Or perhaps she just didn't care. It didn't really matter at this point. The divorce papers would be served to Karen the following Friday while she was either at work or at her lover's. Am I running out on her, you may ask? Yes, I am. It hurts me too much to face her with her infidelity. I know that if I confront her now, she'd be sorry, cry, and possibly beg me to forgive her. That's exactly what I don't want. I don't want to look like some beggar trying to get his wife back that way. What I wanted was for her to realize that I loved her and that she still loved me. I wanted her to see for herself what she could lose. I wanted her to take me back. Damn it. Obviously, I lost to her lover, even though I know what kind of man he is. I know that she won't or can't see that side of him yet. She will, though right about the time the divorce paperwork is served or shortly thereafter. Until then, I planned on calling her nightly, like I usually did, hoping she wouldn't notice I was using a motel phone or be too concerned about my not using my cell phone. I figured she'd never notice anyway, as she always seemed too distracted to really talk to me now. I didn't know what she expected of me. I didn't know why she even started the affair or why she kept at it. I really didn't know what she truly felt about me anymore either. She couldn't love me, not at least like I loved her once before all this started. If she did love me, she'd never have been with another man. But she had. She'd been with him for months now and showed no signs of stopping. I'd given up after months of hard work on my part to try to win her back. I saw the handwriting on the wall. I had won and lost. Angry again, I began to work on my fake story, trying to keep my bile down as Karen walked up to the front door. I went into the kitchen and got out a cold beer. I was desperate to do anything to keep my mind busy while I worked at calming down inside. This was not the time to mess up and blow my plan all to hell. After talking to my lawyer, I'd found out exactly what the courts would expect in our divorce. I was reasonably certain that Karen would welcome the divorce, since she seemingly had given up on me. Now I was also certain she'd have her lover move in with her right away after getting those papers next week. My closet doors were closed up, the dresser drawers too. A casual glance by her wouldn't reveal the almost total emptiness they contained now. I wondered briefly what she'd think when she discovered that emptiness. Would she feel anything at all? How would she feel to find out that the few remaining clothes in my closet and dresser were ones she'd given me? Smiling as she walked in, she came up to give me a hug. I turned my head so her kiss met my cheek. Not a new thing as of late either. She hadn't complained about it before, and she didn't tonight either. The last time we'd had sex was over 2 weeks ago, and she evidently hadn't noticed the lack of sex with me. Her lover must be getting it real good from her. "How was your day today?" I asked, not really caring what kind of day she had, but I knew I had to pretend to be the same old loving schmuck of a husband she could count on. "It was good. You seem upset. Is something wrong?" Her reply was automatic, even though she tried to tinge it with concern. "Yeah, I have to make a trip again for work. I'll be gone a week, leaving in the morning." I was watching her for a reaction, only seeing a smile begin on her lips before she forced a more serious, concerned pout. "Oh, honey, on a Saturday? You have to travel tomorrow?" Her eyes spoke the truth, though, and I could see it. She really seemed relieved I was going to be gone. She was even happy about it. More time for her lover, perhaps. "Yeah, it's going to be a long week. The job is behind, and I have to go oversee the construction." I was relieved that she seemed to be taking my huge lie as the truth and wasn't getting all angry as she used to. I knew enough to keep my answers short and simple, no elaboration such as she'd given me over the last months. That was one of the tip-offs to me about her affair. Her excuses were minutely detailed to an extreme, and then one day I had to take a trip out to a job, and she hadn't argued about it with me like she had in the past. It had caused me some wonder. Later, not much later, I discovered her affair, and then it all made sense. We had dinner and watched TV for a while. She was in her favorite chair, and I sat on the couch, hoping she'd have a last-minute change of heart and stop me from my chosen path that started in the morning. I held out hope for a couple of hours, but it wasn't to be. We'd lost it all. I could see clearly now. She sat there ignoring me for the most part and never once looked at me. It was as if I wasn't even there. She watched TV, but I could tell from her actions that she was thinking about her lover and how much they'd be able to be together this week. If she only knew that I'd be gone forever tomorrow. Meanwhile, in Karen's mind, he doesn't suspect a thing. I'll have a whole week with Brian. He'll be able to sleep over here with me, or I'll stay at his place. We'll get lots of sex in, and I know he'll take me out nightly for dinner and dancing too. I know that I shouldn't be happy about this at all, but Dave's trip will be exciting for me. He'll be out of town, and I'll have Brian as much as I want. It will be great. My plan for one last great week just got better. Next week after Dave gets back home, I'll be able to cut it off with Brian and concentrate on Dave and me. It'll work out perfectly. We'll go out with a bang. That night, I rolled over and tried to get Dave interested in some loving, but I found him snoring lightly. He was asleep again. The last few months had been hard on him with his job and all, but it surprised me that he'd gone without sex with me for so long. The thought entered my mind in an instant, unbidden. Can he be cheating on me with someone? Was it possible that I'd missed any signs, that he could have discovered my cheating on him, and he'd been doing the same to get even? Looking at his face as he slept, I couldn't see anything that would tell me. I knew he loved me. I questioned once again my affair and why I was still carrying on with Brian. Brian wined and dined me. He took me dancing. He was okay in bed, about the same size as Dave, but it was the other things Brian did that caused me to want to be with him. Dave loved me, and in our lovemaking, that was a difference that I cherished. Brian drilled me, and at times it was hot and rough and what I needed. Brian took care of needs other than sex for me too. At times, I really liked going out to eat and dance with Brian. He was gentle and attentive while we were out, and it was as if I was the only woman in the world in his eyes. So much so that when we got back to his place, or the motel rooms as the case may be, I was ready to pay him back for the great times. Our time had been exquisite, but it was about time to stop it. Lately, I felt like I was losing Dave, and my greatest fear was that he'd discover my affair and either leave me or hurt Brian, or worse yet, do both. Matter of fact, I've noticed that for the last few months, Dave has been working hard to be a good husband for me. A little stray, worrisome thought crept into my mind. Was that because he knew about my affair and he was trying to one-up my lover? I dismissed that thought immediately. Had Dave known, I knew what would happen. He'd go ballistic and probably go after Brian. I didn't want to have to bail Dave out of jail should he do something rash. I wasn't sure what Dave could or would do if he found out about my affair, but I was relatively certain that he'd leave me in an instant. Yes, this week would signal the end of my time with Brian. As fun as it had been, I needed to concentrate on my husband and start our family. It was time. The next morning I woke to an empty bed. He left without a hug, kiss, or even a goodbye. At first I was uneasy, even a bit afraid, but I convinced myself that he didn't want to wake me up. Dave is a loving husband and caring enough to know that I was tired and could use some extra sleep. His call that night was good, but nowhere near as good as having him at home with me. Of course, Brian was on his way to our place as I spoke with my loving husband. I was going out with Brian that night, and we'd end up at either his place or here. I'd have my cell phone, and Dave usually called me on that anyway. Dave seemed preoccupied during the call, but I knew that his job was probably weighing on his mind. When he had to go out of town like this, he usually focused on the issues at work, and that left him little time to sit and think about not being near me. This worked in my favor as far as Brian and I went too, so I understood and was understanding of his lack of focus on us at times like this. I was ready for Brian when he knocked on the door. I'd left the garage door open, and he knew to just drive in, close the door, and then come around to the back patio door. I was sitting on the kitchen counter, naked, waiting. His knock caused my spine to shiver as I knew what he'd do once he opened that door and saw me like this. "Karen, are you here?" His deep voice sent shivers down my spine again, and as he walked in seeing me, the look in his eyes made me go wetter than ever. "I'm right here, waiting. Brian, can we take care of something before we head out to dinner and dancing? I find that I'm a little in need." I could hear it in his voice, lust, deep desire. I turned him on. "Jesus, oh God, you're beautiful, Karen, amazingly so." His hands were working the button on his shirt as he slowly licked his lips. I could see desire in his eyes, and that desire was part of why I had continued the affair as long as I had. Dave, for whatever reason, hadn't shown that look to me for quite some time now. Brian did me rough. He smiled as he watched my debauchery. I could never be this open and free with Dave for some reason, though with Brian, I loved to tease like this. Afterward, we took a shower together. After that, we went out to dinner. I don't love Brian, I've mentioned that. This would be our last week together, I told him. But he still had what it took to make me a wild and wanting 304. I never took the time to think, truly think about what I could lose. I never took the time to really consider my actions and how they could affect my husband's love for me. I just went with the moment and longed for the feel and taste of illicit excitement that Brian brought me. At dinner, we sat near the back in a darkened booth. As we ate, Brian kept feeling me up. After dinner, he took me dancing at an upscale crowded club. Once on the dance floor, his dancing became suggestive and downright sexual. I reveled in the nastiness of it all. Here I was, a married woman whose husband was away, out with a lover who was feeling me up in public. It was truly the sexual odyssey I was journeying on, more than anything else, I suppose. For Brian, I could be the 304 and not worry about what he'd think of me later on. For his part, Brian had kept up some gentlemanly efforts, and I was thankful for that. At one point during a slow dance, Brian's hands were on my butt. What would Dave have thought if he'd seen Brian doing that? I wondered briefly, but almost as quickly as the thought of my husband entered my mind, Brian brushed him out by his actions. I saw a few women nearby staring at us with what could only be described as lustful imaginings. Of course, there were a few, thankfully very few, that were more disapproving too. Later that evening, in my bed in my home, Brian drilled the living hell out of me. As he was doing me for the third time, my phone rang. I answered it, motioning Brian to be quiet. "Hey, it's me. I got in a bit later than I figured I would, but I thought you'd want to know. How was your drive?" "Uneventful. What time do you have to be at work in the morning?" "Early. I'm going to hit the hay. Talk to you tomorrow. I love you. Good night, honey. Brian was drilling me as I spoke to Dave. I was troubled a little bit in that I didn't hear Dave say he loved me. I must have missed it, what with Brian screwing me while I was on the phone. Too distracting. My thoughts were dropped suddenly as Brian picked up the pace and started to drill me hard and fast. My climax overtook all my thoughts, and for the rest of the night, Brian kept my mind on him and his tool. For the first time ever, I guess, having Brian drilling me while I was on the phone with Dave did something deep inside me, making me feel extra sexy or something. The rest of the week went by quickly, and Brian just stayed at my home in the evenings. We'd have sex most of the late afternoon after work, go out and eat dinner, and then come back to have more sex until we crashed and slept until it was time to get up and go to work. I was feeling nasty knowing that me, a married woman, was sleeping with a man I wasn't married to. The sharp edge of excitement that I now craved was like an explosion of lust all week long. Even then, I knew that Friday would be the end of it. I was breaking it off Friday, taking the weekend off, and resting up for Dave's return home. I planned to make up for my dalliances with Brian and make sure that Dave knew I loved him. From Dave's end, I arrived at my new home early in the afternoon. I'd driven quite fast, pressing the speed limit and the extra bit that most highway patrol cops would allow. I was in a hurry and wanted to get as far away from the wreck of my marriage as I could. Steve, my old friend, had a pretty busy business going for him. He and his wife had worked hard to bring it from the idea stage into reality. Over the years, he'd written, emailed, and phoned me, bouncing ideas off me and trying to get me to work for him. He'd been to my wedding, he'd been a pallbearer at my dad's funeral, he'd been a close friend of mine since high school. His wife, Jane, was a great lady and had a damn good head on her shoulders. I often found myself wishing that Karen was more like Jane. One could look at Jane and see that she'd never cheat on Steve. Ever. She had a look in her eyes whenever she looked at her husband that shouted, "I love you, Steve," every time. I hadn't seen that look in Karen's eyes for quite some time now, at least 8 months anyway. My new job would be working the programming end of things. I'm very good at programming, having been targeted by Microsoft, Sun, and a few others when I graduated. My college master's thesis had been on my pet project in programming, and I'd been working on that idea for some time. I had made arrangements with Steve to share it with him, since it was about ready. It was how I bought into Steve and Jane's business. By the time my divorce was over, I'd probably be making some serious bucks for the first time in my life. I timed everything over the last few months to ensure that by the time that happened, I'd be free of Karen. She didn't deserve to share in my idea or the wealth it would bring anymore. I had put up with her cheating this long for a reason, and now the end result of that patience was coming along. That thought hit me out of the blue, and I had a twinge. I felt a loss, some anger, of course, but mostly sadness. I still asked myself why I hadn't been enough for her. I had no answers, and now I didn't want to hear what she tried to tell me either. We were finished. Monday morning dawned bright, and my appearance at my new job was taken with surprise. Steve introduced me to the crew, and all of them were kind, positive, and very friendly. The crew was 14 men and women. Actually, it was 3 men and 11 women, not counting Steve, Jane, or me. I was welcomed like a hero there to save the day, though the business needed no saving that I could see. The first few days, I was busy moving and unpacking my things, not only in my new office, but in my new home too. I didn't have time to think about my personal life, and quite frankly, I was thankful I didn't have to do that. Thinking about Karen and what had happened over these last months could drive me to drink, and I didn't want to go there. Steve and Jane had found me the perfect home to live in. I got the impression the business had purchased it expressly for me since Steve knew me fairly well, and Jane had good taste in decorating. The 3-bedroom house was about as great a place as I could have hoped to find, and it was mine, rent and payment free. I never had to stay in a motel, but for one night. I felt at home almost right away, which was surprising. Jane and Steve had me over for dinner twice that week, and they knew what was going on in my personal life. Jane clucked over me like a mother hen, worrying about me, trying to soften any bumps I might have. Steve patiently watched her, stepping in time and again to stop her from getting too upset about my soon-to-be ex. Jane was a loyal and good friend, one in a million, protective and caring. She was soon working on setting me up with date nights. It took some time on my part, and Steve's, for that matter, to slow her down. I wasn't interested in any other women at this moment in time. I wanted to get my divorce out of the way and then have some time by myself, figuring out what I really wanted in my life. Dating wasn't high on my agenda for the foreseeable future. I got the call from my lawyer on Thursday. "Dave, we're serving Karen tomorrow at her place of work. It's all set up. The process server will present the papers to her just before noon, so you better be ready for some excitement. I also have some good DVDs of the last week, too. She and her lover have been quite busy. Hang in there, buddy, and I'll let you know how things stand tomorrow night." My lawyer was good, one of the best in the city, perhaps the state. She was the type of lawyer other lawyers dreaded facing in court. I had gotten lucky being able to get her to represent me. At first, Beth, my lawyer, hadn't wanted to take me on until I explained what Karen had been doing and who she was seeing. Once she knew that Karen had been the one stepping outside the marital vow, that she hadn't been receptive to my attempts to win her back, and that her lover was the infamous Brian, Beth had insisted I let her take the case. Over time, I learned that Brian had been involved in several other marital breakups. In each case, he managed to stay under the radar, keeping out of the divorce drama and pain caused by his philandering. Beth had a very special place she wanted to see Brian end up in, and I think the devil himself would lose to this lady. It seems Brian wasn't just a predator. He pushed his conquests into doing more and more, eventually leading them into something resembling prostitution. He used these women to line up more business for his company, fulfilling favors to people he owed. I knew Karen couldn't see that side of him yet, but I was certain if she kept seeing him, she would. I also knew Karen would regret having hooked up with him eventually. Too bad it would be too late for her to have me to come running back to. Brian's modus operandi was clear. He'd find a woman who wasn't quite there in terms of confidence, dress, or looks, not all, just one of those factors, and he'd work on them, building them up until he got between their legs. Once he became their lover, he'd set them up to work for him. He was slick, no doubt about that. Beth wanted a piece of him badly, and my marriage was going to be the instrument of his destruction, it seemed. The week went by slowly, and each night when I called Karen, it took all my willpower to act like I cared. Thursday night would be the last call I'd ever make to her. I also knew she'd try her hardest to reach me the next day after being served. Fortunately, by that time, my old cell phone would be deactivated. Karen continues, "Dave called me Thursday and sounded down. I was feeling guilty, too. I'd been thinking all week long in between my sex fest with Brian that it was time to break it off. I should never have let it start to begin with. All day Thursday, I had a gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but deep down, I knew something was going on in my universe. My stomach had been upset, and I had this sense of impending doom. Our conversation was different, too. Dave sounded relieved, but he didn't seem to want to talk. He called, and then it was like he was waiting for me to carry the conversation. When we hung up, I told him I loved him, and he just said goodbye. Had I known then what I know now, I'd never have let him go on that trip. I would have begged him for forgiveness. Hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it? I put my worries out of my mind, and as I turned from hanging up, I began to tell Brian that this would be our last night together. I was breaking it off now, so I'd have 2 or 3 days to prepare for my husband's return. I wanted to be sure that nothing of Brian would be left in or on my body. No smells, no residual sperm, nothing. The phone call troubled me late that night, but I eventually fell asleep. At work on Friday, just before lunch, my whole world came crashing down. I heard my name mentioned by a man in a dark brown suit. The suit was ill-fitting, and he looked hard around the eyes as he walked toward me. "Karen Miller. Yes, can I help you?" "You've been served." With that, my entire world crumbled. I wasn't sure what I was being sued for, but I knew something was dreadfully wrong. Without even looking in the envelope he handed me, I called Dave. He'd know what to do. I always turned to my husband when things went wrong, and he always fixed them. He'd fix this, whatever it was. I hit speed dial on my cell phone, but all I got was a message saying Dave's number was no longer in service. I tried again, thinking maybe it was a mistake. I got the same message. Suddenly I was scared. A chill coursed through my body as panic set in. I did the only thing I knew to do. I called Dave's boss, Tom Stevens. Tom, I can't seem to get a hold of Dave. Do you know where he's staying? Karen? Yes, this is Karen. Why are you calling here? Dave quit. His last day was last Friday. He took another job somewhere else. He told me he was moving there permanently. I sat there, holding my cell phone to my ear. Dave had quit his job. His last day had been last Friday. He'd moved away. I didn't know what to do. I sat at my desk in shock. Not only did I fear for my life now, but I also realized I'd made a fool of myself to Dave's former boss. I mean, how would it look to anyone seeing it from the outside, his own wife, unaware of what was going on with him? The brown envelope was looking more and more like a viper waiting to strike. Finally, I opened it up and discovered the cost of my affair. I'd lost my husband. The only man I'd ever loved was gone. He'd left me. I'd chased him away with my cheap, tawdry affair. And for what? Some temporary gratification that Dave could have given me had I let him. I'm not sure how long I sat at my desk crying, but a coworker finally saw me and got me off to the ladies' room. In tears, I explained what was going on. At first, Mary was angry that my husband could be so cruel. But after I explained my part, she got angry at me instead. Are you stupid or crazy? Jesus, Karen, that man worshipped the ground you walked on. He loved you. He was totally in love with you, and you do this to him? He's a great catch, and you caught and released him. You have to be out of your mind to let a man like Dave go like this. What were you thinking? On your lover's best day, he couldn't be a tenth the man Dave is on his worst day. You poor, foolish woman. I pity you, I really do. I never knew he'd find out, Mary. I thought I'd have my fling. Dave would never know, and after it was over with Brian, I'd make it up to Dave. Honey, husbands will always find out. Always. They'll notice when you start to act different. All cheaters do that. It's the little things at first. Your lover makes you feel sexy in ways your husband obviously didn't. Otherwise, your lover wouldn't have gotten to you like he did. Pretty soon, you're so caught up in your affair that you can't see what you're doing to your loving husband. Dave knew. He felt it. Over time, he dug up the facts. You just didn't see it because you were too caught up in your deception and games. Oh God, I've lost him. Maybe not. He'll need to talk to you. There will have to be closure. He'll need it. You may have a small chance to get him to forgive you. He won't forget, but he may forgive you. He hit me with divorce papers today, Mary. He's been acting strange all week when I talked to him on the phone, and now I can't even call him. I've lost him. He'd never have left like this, quitting his job and everything unless he'd given up on me. Why couldn't I have seen this? Why did I keep on with Brian? Oh my God. I've ruined my life, my marriage, everything. You'll live, Karen. Trust me, I know. You'll live. How do you know that? I've told you I've been there. I've been right where you are. I too had an affair. My ex left me. He beat the holy hell out of my lover, but he left me. I managed to survive. You cheated on your husband too? Yeah. I never saw the little changes in how I treated my husband until it was too late. Just like you. That's the problem with cheating. At first, you try so hard to hide everything, so you act differently than you normally would, because what if your husband discovers that you have another man's leavings in you? Later, you begin to feel some kind of power, thinking you're getting away with it, so you relax and ease any guilt. You even begin to give more to your husband. But then, you start to feel like your husband must be less of a man since you're fooling him so easily, and he doesn't have a clue. Usually, the husband has it all figured out way before you know. How did he find out? Don't know, Karen. All I know is that one day I was served just like you. He had pictures, recordings, even a DVD of me with my lover. Our lawyers fought it out hard. I fought the divorce, trying to convince my husband that I'd changed, that I loved him more than any other man. But it was all for nothing. I lost everything I valued in the divorce, my husband and his unadulterated love for me. His queen. I took that pristine love and dirtied it all up. So even I couldn't have forgiven myself if I had been in his shoes. Oh my God, I've lost him. He's gone. I'm all alone. It doesn't look good for you right now, Karen. But if you work as hard as you can, you might be able to get him to forgive you. He really loved you a lot, and everyone here knows that. You might be able to change his mind about you, but you have to try hard enough. I don't even know where to find him, Mary. He quit his job and moved away a week ago. I'm not even sure where he is now. He could be anywhere at all. We'll find him. He'll have to show up eventually, if only to sign the divorce papers. Yeah, but by then it will be far too late for us to reconcile. Call his lawyer and demand that Dave contact you as soon as he can. He may not tell you where to find him, but if you can get Dave to call you, you might be able to reverse search the phone number and locate where he is. What if he doesn't call me? What then? There are other ways to locate people nowadays, Karen. We'll find him. Trust me. Mary tried to sound upbeat and positive, but deep down she was afraid that Dave had flown the coop for a particular reason, and the divorce was probably it. She felt that Dave was going to avoid any contact with Karen because he was afraid he'd buckle under and appear weak by talking to her, letting himself be convinced into taking his cheating wife back. Mary understood Dave's feelings more than Karen could realize. Her own husband had told her those exact same things when he refused to talk to her about her cheating and the possibility of reconciliation. He had even been ashamed that he had let her talk him into an hour-long conversation, knowing she was trying to talk him out of the divorce. In the end, he had stood strong and left her. Neither had remarried since then, and their divorce had been over 2 years before. Mary had her painful prior experience with divorce, and now she'd do whatever she could to help Karen with hers. Karen needed her help more than she realized, far more than she would know for quite some time. Back to Dave. I had been at work for a few weeks when the call came. Dave, she wants to talk. She's refusing to sign anything, and she says she'll fight the divorce tooth and nail. Oh man, why? She has the man she wants, so why fight it? Because she doesn't have the man she wants. I've seen this before. Trust me, Dave, she is dying inside right now because you found out, left her, and then hit her with the divorce. I'm not real certain your actions were the best way to go about doing things, but I do understand why you did it. In the end, she'll fight it, delaying the whole mess until it costs a bunch in legal fees. I recommend that you sit down and talk with her. Get her to give it up. Maybe she'll see how serious you really are and walk away then. Now she wants to talk? No. I tried for months to get her to open up and talk. I tried for months to turn her around and back into the woman I loved and desired. Now she wants to talk? Sorry, I don't mean to blow up like this. It just pisses me off so much. Well, you could probably use some good news then, huh? Good news? Yeah, Sammy boy, her lover, just went down hard. Seems he tried to force his way in on Karen, all pissed off about her breaking it off with him and meaning it. The cops were called, and as they hauled him off to jail, I hear that some other women called the cops and started filing charges too. How'd the other women know? Oh, wait, don't answer that. I think I know what little birdie got the word out about him. Why, Dave, I'm surprised you'd think that I, an officer of the court, could or would do such a thing. I never said you did, Beth. I can see the light, though. Not to worry, I won't ever tell. I hope the son of a witch goes away for a long, long time. You and me both, mister. You and me both. Anyway, you want me to set up a meet between you and Karen? Fine. Make it for next Saturday in the afternoon. I'll meet her at Chero's bar. She'll know where that's at, I'm sure. Hey, you doing okay, Dave? Yeah, still hurts. My new job is keeping me plenty busy, though, so I don't have to think too much about things. Thanks, Beth. You know, you're one of the few good guys, Dave. I respect you and how you tried to fix things before they got to this point. Too bad Karen didn't see that until it was too late. Yeah, too bad. Karen continues. Our talk wasn't good. Dave flat out refused to agree to any chance of reconciliation. He told me I'd burned the bridge to ashes and there was no structure left to repair. Our marriage was dead and he wanted it buried. I was forced to sign off on our marriage. Once I heard his voice and saw the look in his eyes, I knew I had screwed up. I knew he'd never bend on this. Maybe if I had seen something like this coming earlier, I would have had a chance to save our marriage. But now, not a chance in a million. The worst part of all of this, I love him completely totally and forever. I just didn't realize how much until it was too late. He found a new job, moved away, and led me to believe he'd be home at the end of the week. Yeah, he lied to me. The problem I have now is knowing that I lied far more, for far longer, and in a far worse way. My life is empty. My lover is gone, evidently headed to jail. My husband is gone, and soon to be my ex-husband. All that's left of my marriage is his signing the decree. I'm still young enough to start over, but the clock is ticking, and soon I'll be in that danger zone for having children. I couldn't keep my first husband, who I loved dearly, even though through my cheating I clearly showed the opposite to those who saw what happened. I signed the final papers today. The decree nisi was the beginning of the end, the decree absolute being what I signed today. So cold, so formal, so empty. Dave finishes. My life has gone through a metamorphosis. With Karen gone, living in a new city, and my new job keeping me busy, I haven't had a lot of time to dwell on the recent past. Sure, I've had some nights that were long, cold, and yes, empty, but I'm seeing some silver linings beginning to show up. My process program is working far better than even I hoped for. Our business is leaping ahead with growing momentum, thanks to our combined efforts. I found a nice house that I moved into, and one day I hope it becomes home to me. Lastly, there are a few nice prospects for female companionship on my horizon. I'm a bit gun-shy about new relationships, but I've dated a little here and there. I hope to get over the nasty mess behind me soon. Then, I can begin to look for someone special again. I'm pretty sure they won't look, sound, or act anything like Karen. And that's okay with me. I'm about over her now, totally. Just a little more time, and I'll bet even those memories of her won't sting anymore.
Thanks for hanging out with me on today's episode, brother. I'm Jack, host of this podcast, and it's great having you here. If today's story hit home, send it on to a buddy who might need it. Remember, we're all in this together, turning life's curveballs into wins. If you have an opinion or story to share, then drop a line in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. Until next time, keep your chin up and keep pushing forward. Stay strong, folks.